December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
With the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, America entered the war. Inspiring legions of men and women to join the war effort, to train, to put their lives on the line for the country they loved. In the ensuing years, at opposite ends of the globe, brave soldiers fought on land, on sea, and from the air to ensure victory in 1945. Today, we honor more than 150 living veterans of World War II who are with us in person, and we remember those who have passed. Your hosts for Montgomery County Honors World War II veterans are County Executive Isaiah Leggett and the Montgomery County Council. We also have legendary television broadcaster Ted Koppel to lead today's ceremonies. Please stand as the award-winning Color Guard of American Legion Post 86 in Rockville presents the colors that you fought so hard to protect. Remain standing as Montgomery County Police Officer J.J. Johnson sings our national anthem.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please be seated. Thank you. On behalf of Montgomery County Executive Isaiah Leggett, County Council President Roger Berliner, and the entire City Council and all of the residents of Montgomery County, I want to welcome you to a very special day as we honor more than 150 veterans of World War II who are here with us today, and remember the many who served America and the entire world 70 years ago. Throughout the morning, you will likely hear these men and women often referred to as the greatest generation. It was a phrase coined by my old friend Tom Brokaw, and it captures the spirit of the time. It says something about the members of that generation, though, that they are, for the most part, a little bit uncomfortable with that description. Despite our preference for hyperbole these days, not everyone who serves in the military is a hero, and just one of the many lessons that these men and women teach us is the simple nobility of just having done their jobs. We can respect their wishes today and not call them heroes, but more than 500 of us have gathered here this morning to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that you are very special. We're gathered, yes, please. We're gathered today to hear from some of these very special people, including several of the veterans themselves. You will also hear and see some of their stories on video, which is part of a larger, evolving project in which the county's PEG cable stations are interviewing many of our veterans for a documentary that will be shown this spring. As for my role and why I wanted to be here, I was in London during the Second World War. My parents were refugees from Germany, and I was born in England in 1940. So you'll understand when I tell you that my memories of the war are those of a very small child. In those days, the milkman still delivered his bottles in a horse-drawn cart. And my father, who grew roses in our tiny garden, would position me in front of the house with a small bucket and a shovel. And I would wait for the horse to do what horses eventually do. And then I'd run out and harvest the horse manure for the roses. Some people have been unkind enough to suggest that this was early training for my later career as a journalist. The war intruded ever so slightly on my life. I learned to listen to the whistle of incoming German rockets, the V-1s and the V-2s, or the doodlebugs as we called them. When they stopped whistling, there would be a few seconds of silence, and then the explosion when they landed. During the war, I slept under my father's steel desk. I remember being very upset because our house was the only one on the Hazelmere Gardens without a broken window. I thought that was very unpatriotic. And I remember the Americans, some of you perhaps, all of you broad-shouldered men and women, 8 feet tall, with unbelievably white, sparkling teeth, in your military convoys heading up the North Circular Road. And we children would run by the side of your jeeps and trucks yelling out, "Any gum, chum?" And you would toss us packets of chiclets and strips of Wrigley's. Well, I'm 67 years late in telling you this, but thank you. Thank you for what you did on Okinawa, and on the beaches of Normandy. Thank you for your pain and your suffering. And for the comrades you lost. And for making the world safe. You did that. You really did. And oh yes, one more thing. Thanks for the gum, chum. And now it's time for you to meet our hosts. County Executive Isaiah Leggett shares the experience of those who have served our nation in uniform. He served as an infantry captain in the United States Army, and during his tour of duty in the Vietnam War, among the honors he was given was the Bronze Star. As county executive, he inspired the creation of the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans. Please join me now in welcoming County Executive Isaiah Leggett.
Thank you. I think there's a thank that we should give to Mr. Topper for your work and your very eloquent description of your childhood and why we are here today. First of all, thank you, and good morning. I want to welcome all of you to the World War II veterans who are here with us today. We honor you, and we're delighted that so many of you are here. Thank you for your service. There's a reason why many have referred to those of World War II, the service there, those who served as the part of the greatest generation. And we've debated oftentimes about whether or not that is the proper term. But for the greatest generation, the best, as some have called it, the most central generation, it is clear to me that we would not have subsequent generations of the America that we know today. And that's true. Your service and your dedication made this country what it is today. Although there have been more than 7 decades that have passed since the beginning of the Second World War, this is a fitting time to acknowledge your courage, your patriotism, and say thank you for making the world a better place. And although we have challenges at times, and although we've had great debates, and we are part of a political process that is ongoing today, we are a better place, a safer place. As a veteran of the Vietnam War, I know firsthand the sacrifices that have been made by members of our military during the most difficult times of war. Sacrifice that not only affect our soldiers, but many family members left behind. There are young people who never saw their parents. There are sisters and brothers who never had an opportunity to say goodbye. There are children who were born who never had an opportunity to witness and to know this very special bond that the parent can provide, or brother and sister. To quote from U.S. Senator and former Governor of Georgia, Zed Miller, he said, "Never in the history of the world has a soldier sacrificed more for freedom and liberty of total strangers than the American soldier." I'll repeat that. Never in the history of the world has any soldier sacrificed more for the freedom and liberty of total strangers than the American soldier. You heard one of those total strangers a moment ago who talked about receiving a packet gun. You hear stories about others who never, ever had an opportunity to meet you, but you made it possible for them to have the life that they live today. The Europe that we see today, the America, the world that we see today. Your sacrifices have helped to keep our nation the land of the free, and your courage has made this country the home of the brave. I am so honored to see so many of you here today, the brave men and women who served our country more than 7 decades ago and had the opportunity today to say thank you for your services. Your stories and recollections are amazing, and I encourage our young people to take the time to educate themselves about the troubling time in our world's history and reflect on the many sacrifices made by so many to ensure the freedoms of generations to come. Winston Churchill once said that we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give, and you've given plenty. These men and women that we see today offered up their lives to save the world from fascism and to form a form of dictatorship that made the point of subjugating people because of their hatred of this country and countries around the world, because of how they worship, and because of the color of their skin. America, the country where we have freedom and liberty, could not exist or coexist with such forces in the world. We had to be the liberators. We had to prevail, and we did. As President Clinton put it on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, he said, "These men and women are older now, but when they were young, they saved the world." They saved the world. And you did. And you did it with honor, and you did it with distinction. We honor you today, but there could be no single day, no single month, and no single occasion for which we can say enough thank you. We honor you today because it is long, long overdue, and we need to do that as often as we can. We honor you today because our young people need to know the sacrifices that you've made, because far too many of them have grown up in a world where they've forgotten. We honor you today because it is the right thing to do. And I want to again say thank you for your service, thank you for your sacrifices, and thank you for allowing us to honor you. Thank you. Just a couple of acknowledgments. I want to acknowledge the presence of our Maryland Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Ed Child. Please stand, veterans as well. Representing Senator Cardin is Ken Richard. Please stand, Ken. Courtney Samuels, who represented U.S. Congressman Barbara Mikulski. I think Delegate Tom Hucker was here as well, and Tom District were in here today. And I also like to acknowledge the presence of our Chief of Police, Tom Manger, who's in the back. Thank you as well for his time. Thank you very much.
The co-hosts of this event today are the 9 members of the County Council, and they are seated to my right. I'd like to introduce council members Phil Andrews, Mark Eldridge, Valerie Irvin, Nancy Florine, George Leventhal, Nancy Navarro, Craig Rice, and Hans Riemer. The council has been dedicated to providing help in many ways for those who need it, including through Montgomery Cares, one of the nation's best local programs providing medical care for those who can't afford it. Many former veterans have taken advantage of these and other services. And our next speaker will be the current president of the council. Please welcome Council President Roger Berliner.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, on behalf of all of my colleagues on the Montgomery County Council, we salute you among us today, some 150 strong, who more than 70 years ago reshaped our lives, our history, and our destiny. Writers far more eloquent than I have struggled to put into words what your courage and sacrifice has meant to the generations that have followed you. So accept this humble tribute as one more modest offering of our deepest gratitude and respect for all you did. Honoring you reminds us of so much that we often lose sight of: how close our world was to succumbing to unspeakable evil, of the extraordinary service and sacrifice necessary to endure, and of the sense of shared purpose that permeated our country and deepened our resolve. The world really did exist in black and white at that time. There was no nuance to ponder. There was only a job to get done. There was, at that moment, an iconic poster that captured it. A poster of Rosie the Riveter, a factory woman with her sleeves rolled up under the banner, "We can do it." And you, ladies and gentlemen, did it. Whether you were camp liberators or guarding our own shores, whether you were in the European theater, the Pacific, or Northern Africa, whether you served in the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, or Coast Guard, you were our world's white knights in shining armor, defending the realm. Today we gather to honor you and to hear your stories. For while so many books and movies have been made, nothing is so powerful as hearing directly from you. Particularly since your generation was not much for talking about such things. Most of you bore your experiences within. My generation seemed to have invented therapy, and we talk about our issues. And the next generation has gone one step further, and you can see every secret in the world on Facebook. Yours was the stoic one, holding it deeply within. That was certainly true of my own father, Lieutenant David Lee Berliner, captain of the USS Requisite, a minesweeper that was part of one of the most extraordinary efforts of the war in the Pacific. Minesweepers, as you know well, took the lead in convoys that battled for control of the Pacific, protecting the cruisers and battleships that followed in their wake. Like so many of you, my father did not share many of the details of his war experience with his family, not his wife, not his son, or his daughters. He carried the wounds of the war on the inside. But I heard enough to know that every day he woke up knowing that the odds were not on his side, that the kamikaze attacks were too close, and that too many of the ships he sought to protect went down. And yet in him, as I suspect in each of you, there was steel. There was unwavering faith. And there was a profound respect for the chain of command, the brilliance of the men he served under, and the bravery of the men who served with him. So today you have to indulge us as we bear witness to your unique contribution to world history, whether you were on the front lines or bandaging the wounded, whether you were making the planes fly or keeping our crews supplied, whether you were at the Battle of the Bulge or on Iwo Jima and witnessed our flag being raised as two gentlemen in the front row did. Montgomery County celebrates and salutes you. And it is fitting for our county to do so, because now we are home to the finest medical institution in the world dedicated to caring for our brave wounded warriors. We see every day the sacrifice in life and limb that those who have come after you have been called to make. It is itself a daily and painful reminder of the cost of defending our liberties and of not backing down from tyranny or terror. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished veterans of World War II, my colleagues on the County Council and I are proud to have initiated this celebration of you, and we owe Neil Greenberger of our staff a special thanks for conceiving of it and carrying it forward in such a splendid manner. We thank all of you for coming out this morning for this special ceremony. But those of you in the audience, you can make it that much more special by making sure that you come up after this program is over and express for yourself your own heartfelt gratitude. I know that so many of you are the children and grandchildren of those we honor today, and that too is so special. And we have this young lady in the front row who is 5 years old. That's because she's 105 and she decided she'd start over. So it is just a total privilege to be part of this ceremony, and I'd like to end like I began. Let me salute you. And the county executive reminds me, we have a proclamation for you. Go ahead. Proclamation from Montgomery County, Maryland. Whereas the men and women of our armed forces who step forward with tremendous courage to defend our nation and protect freedom and democracy overseas are a great source of inspiration to others. And whereas the courage, dedication, self-sacrifice, and compassion of the ordinary heroes of the World War II generation continue to inspire our nation, especially the men and women who are currently serving and protecting our country around the world. And whereas the entire World War II generation, military and civilian alike, has provided a model of national unity and community for future generations of Americans to come together to work for the continued prosperity of the United States and the world. And whereas we all have the utmost respect for these brave men and women referred to as the greatest generation who served this nation during World War II, and welcome the opportunity to acknowledge and thank those veterans from Montgomery County, Maryland for their courage and bravery in defending freedom and democracy. Now, therefore, do we, Isaiah Leggett as County Executive and Roger Berliner as County Council President, hereby proclaim Wednesday, September 19th, 2012 as World War II Veterans Day in Montgomery County. We urge all our residents to join us in recognizing the courage and patriotism of these individuals who fought so nobly and honorably and who played such a significant role in the history of our great country.
I ask Secretary Chow to come up to accept this on behalf of the veterans.
I told you earlier that we have some very special people with us today, and President Berliner has already made reference to one of them. She can be introduced twice. We have people in this room who have lived remarkable lives and accomplished an extraordinary amount since 1945. Almost all of us, when asked our age, though, respond with a 2-digit number. In our front row, we have 2 World War II veterans who require 3 digits, and they have the accomplishments to go along with those years. Elise Dixon was one of the first employees ever at the Pentagon. Was it even the Pentagon then, or was it the War Department?
Yeah, you know, I can hear what you say.
That's all right. I can barely hear what I say myself. But the building, the Pentagon, wasn't even completed when she began working there as a civilian. She later became one of the first women to join the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, what many of you know as the WACs. George Bogus, am I pronouncing that correctly? Bogus. You at least deserve to get your name properly spoken. George Bogus served with General Patton's Third Army in Belgium. He was wounded in the Battle of the Bulge, earning a Purple Heart and a Silver Star. After the war, he served on 3 civil rights campaigns with Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., including on the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. You and I were on that march together. That wasn't bad, but I have another line here so you get a chance to do it again. Please join me in welcoming George Bogus, who is 100 years old, and Mrs. Elise Dixon, who last week on September 11th celebrated her 105th birthday. We have many more amazing stories from the people here with us today. Please watch now as you hear from some of our guests.
I was living here in Washington, D.C. I worked for the post office, so I was sorting my own mail. In fact, I sorted my draft notice. Instead of taking it, I put it in the mail, let them deliver it, because I had to go into the service at that time. And I guess I was just a youngster. I must have been about 19 years old at that time. And I guess I didn't realize where I was. I mean, when I look back, I'm fortunate as well as a lot of other people. I kept writing to my wife, and I got engaged while I was still in the service. She wrote to me every day.
I can remember it was a May night, early in the morning, I should say. I was sound asleep. I had my earplugs put up someplace. I forgot them. Anyway, I was sleeping with my shoes off in full clothes. I had my right arm in through my life jacket and my hat in the back of my head, and I was sound asleep when the first thing we heard was the 4 blasts of the bosun pipe, battle stations. I put my shoes on, grabbed my hat, put my life jacket on, and ran down to my battle station. My battle station was on a 48 caliber automatic rifle. And I'd forgotten my earplugs, and I was kind of worried. But I figured, what the hell? It was only a rerun, okay? It was just a trial. But when I saw the elevator come up with the planes, I didn't know it wasn't going to be a rerun, okay? So anyway, all at once we saw these planes come. Looked like a bunch of mosquitoes. It was Jap planes. We had torpedo planes, we had bombers. I'm telling you, it was awful. After a while, this destroyer came alongside, picking up the wounded sailors and bringing them back. I saw a lot of people jumping off the ship from the starboard side, and didn't hear what was going on. But at that time, this plane came down at me. I could see the sparks where his bullets come out, but I couldn't feel anything, but I couldn't hear anything either. But I kept firing at him. And about 100 to 200 feet above me, he leveled off, and he dropped behind me. That's when he dropped the bomb. because I didn't hear it. I felt it at my feet. And the next thing I knew, everything blacked out. As I flew off, I think I was flying, my knee hit the casing of the gun I was firing at. And next thing I know, I don't know how long it was, maybe it was 2 days or something. But anyway, I woke up and there's a beautiful girl looking at me. I was in a hospital ship.
When we were designated as the 5th Engineer Special Brigade, we knew we were going to be in the first waves. We were in southern England, and at that time the friendships were made, of course. We were authorized 25% above our normal limit because they figured we would lose 25% at least. Well, we lost of the 65, of the 25%, we lost 65% of the engineers, as you'll see on the monument. And it's difficult to talk about that.
Those are just a few of the incredible stories that are gathered in the hearts and minds of the men and women here. You're about to hear another. Soon after the Battle of the Bulge began in December of 1944, a number of members of the Army's 106th Infantry Division were captured en masse. Albert Frumpkin clearly remembers that day on December 19th. He was a prisoner of war until April 28th, 1945, and those were 5 tough months. But Mr. Frumpkin was just as tough. And that is why today we can welcome Silver Spring resident Albert Frumpkin.
For those who are unaware, that was the field artillery song at that time. And I was a member of the 106th Infantry Division, 590th Charlie Battery. My name is Albert Frumpkin, and my wife and I live in Leisure World in Silver Spring. That's my great-granddaughter you hear. We have had a unit there for about 18 years, but until 2008, we actually were residents of Hawaii. We came home to be near family. In December 1941, while playing ball in Coney Island, we heard the news of the attack on Pearl Harbor. It meant almost nothing to us since we were not aware of where it was. The draft was instituted, but I never had the luck to be a lottery winner. I was with a group of 7 fellows who were of age, and we all lived on the same block. The others were called up, and I went to work for the Navy as a messenger in New York City. About a year later, all my friends and my brother were in the service. The mothers of the neighborhood always asked if I were sick or what, since I hadn't been called. I finally spoke to my father and asked if he would mind if I asked the draft board to take me. He said okay, and I asked them to send me, which they did. But I went with a different draft board since they already had their quota. I entered the service on April 1st, 1943. April Fool's Day. I should have known things were going to happen. I was part of the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, and the Germans, instead of attacking head-on, cut us off about 30 miles behind us. Their objective was Amsterdam and our supplies, but all the divisions in the Bulge were either captured as we were or killed. Very few escaped. We were forced to march for 13 days and were put into boxcars for 6 days for the final trip to our camp, Stalag 4B. We had no food or drink for the 19 days. But fortunately, God in His wisdom made it snow, and we grabbed handfuls to sustain us. You can go without food for a long time, but water for only about 3 or 4 days. There were 10,000 men in our group, but after being strafed and bombed by Allied forces who thought we were a German troop movement, only about 7,500 reached our destination. When we arrived at the Stalag, their medical officer injected us with something in our left breast. We couldn't ask what it was, nor did we dare question them at all. About 9 years later, I developed a cyst in my left breast, which my doctor removed. About 25 years later, I developed a lump in the same breast, which I ignored until I had a stomach problem, which made the nipples super sensitive and I couldn't put on an undershirt. It turned out to be cancer, and I had my left breast removed by the VA doctors. Prison life itself was boring. We received 1 meal a day of some ingredients that sometimes were still alive, but we knew it was eat it or die. On April 28, 1944, the Russian army liberated our camp and told us we could stay in camp or accompany them to a little city of Torgau. The war in Europe was not over yet, so I decided to go with them. They gave us freedom of the city, and then when the Germans surrendered, they told us they were going to send us to Russia so they could send us to America and get paid a repatriation fee. I left them to walk to the American lines about 1.5 miles away, which I did. A lesson learned from my experience has been to not wait for someone to tell me I can't do something, but to take action on my own. I smoked 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day for a while and coughed every morning. I was afraid if I went to a doctor, he would tell me to stop smoking. So I did it on my own, cold turkey. I feel very lucky to be alive today, to be with my family and 6 new great-grandchildren, 3 of which were born last year. Having celebrated my 89th birthday this past June, and my wife and I celebrated our 65th wedding anniversary. Thank you.
Our next speaker is not only familiar to those in the Washington area, he has also made himself known on a national level. Please welcome Congressman Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you very much, Ted, and let me thank Ted Koppel for always making sure that in his reporting he gets beyond the soundbite to the substance of the issue. I want to thank you for the integrity of your reporting and the quality of your reporting, Mr. Koppel. And I do want to say to our County Executive, Ike Leggett, thank you for your service. And thank you and Council Member Berliner and the entire Council for organizing this very important and special tribute to all the men and women gathered here today. To Mr. Frumpkin and to all our veterans, I want to join with my colleagues in offering a heartfelt and very simple thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your courage. And thank you for the example that you have set for the other generations, for your children's generation, for your grandchildren's generation, and for your great-grandchildren's generation. One of the things I think is so important is that our country honor the service of our veterans, our greatest generation and those who have come after you. It's very important that we have deeds that match our words, that we keep our promises and commitments to our veterans. And one of the things that marks the greatest generation is when I ask our veterans of World War II whether our nation is keeping faith with them, whether we've met our commitments to the greatest generation, they never answer for themselves. They always ask what we're doing for the next generation, for their children, for their grandchildren, and for their great-grandchildren. And when I ask them whether our nation is meeting our commitments in terms of providing health care and other important promises that were made, again, you all always ask first, what are we doing for the men and women serving today? What are we as a country doing for the men and women who serve our nation's armed forces today? What are we doing to make sure that the men and women serving in Afghanistan have what they need? What are we doing to make sure that the soldiers and our wounded warriors at the National Walter Reed Medical Center are getting in terms of never for yourselves, country first, and asking in a selfless way what we as a nation are doing for others. And that is one of the things that has marked this generation and why we take such pride in pointing to your many, many accomplishments. And it is very important that we continue to make sure that we honor the services of the veterans who come later as well. And the GI Bill, of course, was one of the great accomplishments of this country, rallying to express our support for the men and women who fought in World War II. And it was the men and women from World War II who helped lead the fight to make sure that we passed a GI Bill of Rights for men and women who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. You were at the forefront of that effort. So I want to thank you for your courage and your patriotism, and I want to thank you most of all for the enduring example that you have set for generations that come after you, for that sense of purpose, for that sense of patriotism, and for that sense of focusing on country first. We're hearing the voices of people who answer the call, not just to protect America, you did that, but to protect freedom in the world, to stand up for what is best in humankind. And you did that through your deeds. You continue to do that through the power of your example. Thank you for all you've done.
Interesting little factoid here. The highest ranking elected official in the United States who is currently still on active duty and has served a tour of duty in Iraq and our military happens to be the current Lieutenant Governor of Maryland. Please join me now in welcoming U.S. Army Reserve Colonel and Maryland Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown.
Good morning. First, I want to thank Ted Koppel for his decades of reliable, balanced, and fair reporting of the news, both home and abroad. And I remember that evening, it's probably the first evening of my young life when I stayed up past 11 p.m. to watch TV when you started Nightline. But we really appreciate your reporting and your commitment to military families and veterans are from being here today. I want to thank County Executive Ike Leggett, Roger Berliner, and the entire County Council for making today possible. Let's give them another round of applause. And to Congressman Van Hollen, who worked so tirelessly in Washington, D.C. on behalf of Maryland, I thank you as well. Bill Gray, the chair of the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs, and my fellow veterans. on behalf of Governor Martin O'Malley and the people of the state of Maryland, let me too also express my sincerest gratitude for your service. We're here today to honor the sacrifice of those, both living and deceased, who have worn our country's uniform and defended freedom throughout the world, to celebrate a generation of men and women who refused to sit idly by while the world struggled against tyranny, a generation that fought bravely on the beaches of France, on the seas of the Atlantic, and on the islands of the Pacific. And when their service had ended, you returned home and made extraordinary contributions in society, in government, and in business. We must never forget that your sacrifice allows us to live freely and peacefully today, and that we owe you a great debt of gratitude for that freedom and peace. A lot has changed for the men and women who defend our country since brave men and women like Boris Osharov and Dee Paris and Mr. Fromkin fought for our country. Today, the equipment we use to fight our wars is more advanced. The tactics we employ have evolved, and our enemies come from a different part of the world. But some things will never change for the men and women who serve each and every day to defend our country. Like you, today's soldiers still leave their families and loved ones behind when they answer the call and go off to war. Like you, today's soldiers still rise each morning knowing that they might not make it home to their families and the country they love. Like you, today's soldiers still believe in brotherhood and sisterhood and doing everything you can for the man or woman fighting by your side. And like you, today's soldiers still put their country and their mission first. I joined the Army because my parents raised me to believe that each of us has a responsibility to serve others before we ever get around to serving ourselves. They taught me that since this country has blessed our family with freedom and opportunity, it was my responsibility to give back. As a young man, just out of college, I served as a Cold War helicopter pilot with the 4th Combat Aviation Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division in Europe. I served with the bravest, strongest, most courageous men and women whom I've ever met from all 4 corners of this country. After I left active duty, I stayed in the reserves because I wanted to continue my service to our country. In 28 years in the military, I've seen firsthand how every soldier works hard to live up to the example that your generation set for them. Because when our country was attacked on September 11, 2001, many of them stood up, like you did, and asked, "How can I serve?" The greatest generation will be remembered not just for the battles you fought abroad, but also for what you accomplished when you returned from the front. You came home and started families, started new businesses and careers, built strong communities, and made America the greatest nation in the history of the world. Today's soldiers are following your example. The men and women returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and who call our state home make Maryland a better place in which to live. So thank you, all of you, for what you've done for our country and for what you're doing in Maryland. We owe you so much.
You know, it's not that you don't deserve everything that's being said of you and to you this morning. I'm just beginning to get the feeling that you might like it spread out a little more over the years. We're going to thank you again. You deserve it, you really do. Today's salute to the area's World War II veterans was an idea conceived this spring by the leaders of the county's public cable television stations. Together they are called the PEG organization, which stands for Public, Education, and Government. Now please join me in welcoming the head of Montgomery County's PEG organization, Merlin Renicky.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. We at the Public Education and Government channels are live streaming and televising this event live this morning, and so we appreciate all that are involved. This is indeed an historic event, and we are honored to be a part of it. The idea came out of a meeting of the PEG channels, a unique project for Montgomery County residents that required all 4 PEG organizations coming together to make it happen. The PEG stations would like to thank all of the county agencies and employees and all the volunteers who helped in the organizing of today's special event. We'd also like to thank our friends at Marriott International, which is based in Bethesda and provided all of the beverages today. And we'd also like to thank the Spalding family, which owns the amazing banner of military patches out in the hallway that's on display. If you've not yet had a chance to see it, go out and take a look before you leave. It's pretty amazing. And I think our veterans will see a few patches there they'll recognize as well. Chronicling the major events of the county are what the PEG is all about. There were many great individuals who chronicled the struggle of World War II, none the least of which was the journalist Ernie Pyle. Pyle covered many of the major battles of the war, but he was best known for telling the stories of the brave men and women who served. 70 years ago, the tools that Pyle used were very simple: paper, pen, typewriter. Now, Pyle reporting today, I'd like to think that he'd be tweeting, maybe posting reports to Facebook, uploading photos to Instagram, and videos to YouTube. Now, media and new technologies are here to help us better communicate in an instantaneous way, and that's what the PEG channels provide right here in Montgomery County. But at its heart, reporting and writing those first rough drafts of history are about telling the stories of those who lived them. Bringing history to life for generations to come is vital. And part of the outcome of today's event is the videotaping of many of these veterans' stories, in addition to the ones you've seen on the screen so far this morning, making their stories available both on air and online. In addition to today's live television coverage across 5 television channels simultaneously, long-form interviews from our veteran stories will be aired across the PEG channels this coming Veterans Day, and then a full documentary on Memorial Day 2013. We are honored to be in the company of our veterans this morning and to be a small part of the telling of your stories. We hope that we will live on for generations to come. Thank you.
Montgomery County takes pride in its efforts to make sure that all veterans who live in the county are aware of the benefits and opportunities that are available to them. With us today is Bill Gray, Chairman of the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Congressman Van Hollen, Lieutenant Governor Brown, County Executive Leggett, Council President Berliner, members of the Council, Maryland Secretary Mr. Chow, and honored World War II veterans, and Mr. Koppel. I'm sorry, I forgot you too. Honored World War II veterans, my fellow younger veterans, family and friends of these members of our greatest generation, I bid you good morning and welcome. This morning we have with us members of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and the Merchant Marines. And I'd also like to thank and mention Neil Greenberger, who was also a driving force behind this celebration to honor you World War II vets this morning. Some of my thunder has been stolen already, but such is life. I'll say it again. All these people need to be thanked. And my fellow veterans, welcome home and thank you for your service. As a Vietnam vet, when we came home, a number of us, most of us were not welcomed home at all. So now when a Vietnam vet sees another Vietnam vet, we say welcome home. So again, you ladies and gentlemen of the greatest generation, welcome home and thank you for your service. The Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs came into existence about 4 years ago because County Executive Isaiah Leggett, who has been mentioned, was an infantry captain in Vietnam. He felt it was the right thing to do. The County Council thought it was the right thing to do too, and so we came into existence. The Commission has 16 members.
We have 8 veterans, 4 members who represent the general public, and 4 members who are ex officio members representing the County Health and Human Services Office, the Business Development Office of the county. We have a representative from the County Executive's Office and a representative from Montgomery College. And some of the accomplishments we have, some of the things we have accomplished so far is to advocate to rename the Rockville Library the Rockville Memorial Library. One of the first meetings that we had as a commission, we were lobbied by 5 Gold Star families, 4 of whom had lost sons, and 1 young lady whose husband had recently died. Her husband came home at Christmas for 2 weeks. They planned on having a large family. They had a 2-year-old son, and while he was home for the 2 weeks, she got pregnant. He went back to Afghanistan, and 4 days later, he was killed, not knowing that he had another son on the way. So, and when the soldiers came to knock on Nikki's door, she was at the library with her 2-year-old son. So because of this and the other sons of the members, Gold Star families, they wanted to have the Rockville Library renamed Rockville Memorial to honor all our veterans who have, from Montgomery County, who have given their lives in service to our country. Another thing we have done is to help get 65 VASH vouchers, Veterans Administration Supported Housing vouchers for homeless veterans and their families. And we continue to advocate for a community-based outpatient clinic here in Montgomery County, as well as a veterans court for those who have those veterans who have committed nonviolent crimes. My dad served in the Army from 1942 to 1946, and he was one of the ones who was fortunate enough to stay here and keep the home fires burning. While he served in both Georgia and Texas. And I called my sister yesterday and asked her a little bit more if she remembered information about Dad, and he didn't talk about his service very much, and we surely weren't smart enough to ask him about it. So again, I ask all you World War II vets and other vets, if you haven't done so, tell your story to family and friends, and let your history, your personal history, be known, because it is part of our history, and none of us are getting any younger. My dad was, in one of the stations he was stationed at, was one of the oldest people in the unit. I think it was 38 at the time, and so he was called Pappy. And so I have good memories of him. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've gotten to know several World War II veterans, and I'd like to mention them now, and I'd like to have them stand up. The first one is Maurice Goodwin. Maurice, are you? I saw you. Okay, great. Thank you for your service. Maurice is British. On Maurice's car, he has the license plate RAF WWII. He served, I believe, as a mechanic in the service to his country. In his time here in the United States, he has worked at the Paul Garber facility of the Smithsonian Institution Air and Space Museum. It's a facility which preserves, restores, and puts on display all manner of vehicles, and particularly airplanes, and I believe Maurice worked on airplanes. He recently showed me a logbook which he had sitting on his coffee table at his home, and in that logbook he had the dates and the places that he served in from, I believe he was served from 1941 to 46. And he had times and places from Italy, Iraq, Syria, and Greece, among others. And I've gotten to know him briefly, and just a tremendous man. Another man I've gotten to know is Don McKee. Don? Thank you. Don was a member of the 29th Infantry Division in Europe. He's a past national commander of the 29th Infantry Division, past national commander, yes, of the 29th Infantry Division. He just told me this morning that he led the group from the 29th Division from here to the 50th anniversary of D-Day in Europe. For many years, he's been the program chair and driving force of a World War II and Korea War Veterans meeting, which meets monthly in Silver Spring, and they have guest speakers each month. At election time, he's a voting judge at a local high school. Another person I've met who's going to speak here presently is Dee Paris. Thank you, Dee. I'll steal a little of his thunder. Dee was a tank commander in Germany and fought in the Battle of the Bulge, which took place in Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany in December of 1944 to January 1945. About 2 years ago, my nephew, who lives in Albany, New York, who's a history major in college, asked me if I could set up if I could ask Dee if he would be willing to be interviewed by my nephew. Dee came to my home and spoke with my nephew for about 2 hours, telling his story. And he has come to the Commission on Veterans Affairs a number of times and has spoken to us about the history of tanks as well as other things. And he's made it his mission to tell his story, to educate those younger than themselves about his generation and what his generation went through in the war. We gather here today to honor and reflect upon the men and women who have been given the gift of growing old after serving their country in the military. It has been said a veteran is someone who is, at one point in their life, has given a blank check to the United States of America, up to and including his or her life. On Memorial Day in 2009, on the Today Show, in a special called American Story with Bob Dotson, Bob pondered, what does a soldier who has survived war fear most? That people will forget. We have gathered here today to let our heroes from World War II, members of the greatest generation, and their families know that you have not been forgotten. Thank you.
As you all know, the years leading to World War II were troubling times in America in a number of ways. And the start of the war led to more internal fracturing. This had long been a nation segregated by color. And once the war began, we compounded that injustice by also interning many Japanese Americans into desolate and isolated camps. How ironic that as the war evolved, some of those internal lines of division began to fade. Sadly, recognition of the heroics of the segregated Japanese American units and the segregated all-black units only came many decades after the war ended. It was this past June that the first group of black Marines who trained at Montford Point, North Carolina, and became known as the Montford Point Marines, were given the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest U.S. honor that can be given to civilians. Of the more than 19,000 Montford Point Marines, 366 surviving members were present at those ceremonies. 2 of those are lifelong friends from northern Montgomery County, and they are here with us today. Please join me in recognizing John Henry Cheney and Charles Frazier. And now you will hear from some of the other honorees.
I was in the Malfa Point Marines, and it was all black Marines. Training was really hard because they were really hard on you. And they had to be hard on you because we had to be twice as better than the white Marines, because they were saying that we wasn't able to fight and we couldn't do this and we couldn't do that. And we turned out to be better soldiers than what a lot of them was. In '44, we were sent to Iwo Jima, and it took us 30 days to get from California to Iwo Jima. 2.5 days before we got to the island where they was fighting at Iwo Jima. They stopped all the boats because we was in a convoy and ships all over the water. And so we could see them raising the flag with 4 men that raised that flag. I felt good. It was a sight to see, and the wind was blowing, but they got it up there.
So I was chosen by my squad leader to be number 2 in the point. And of course, the point, you know, are 2 guys who walk ahead of the lead squad. So my number 1 and number 2 man, which was me, headed down the hill, and about 40 or 50 yards down, there was a burst of gunfire, and I was shot down. I was not able to move because I had been shot down in both legs. And so I was left there in the forward slope, not able to move. And I thought perhaps it was better not to move, you know, to play dead. The bullet went through my left femur. This is point of entry here. You see this, and it went through the bone, fractured it. I had a compound comminuted fracture of the left femur, and the bullet went through and came out. Yeah.
The Virginia unit was the first in at 6:30 in the morning on D-Day, and they had a terrible time, as the world knows. The first Maryland unit, the 115th, they came in at around 9:30 in the morning of D-Day, and they had a lot of troubles. So we in the 175th were scheduled to come in the afternoon of D-Day, and the beach was so cluttered and impossible to have any more troops come in that we were held off and didn't come in until the next morning. Well, that probably saved my life right there.
Our mission was destroy the aircraft or destroy the facility. We went out to kill Germans. The way I put it, we wanted to destroy the war-making potential. My one area of victory, we were escorting B-24s. Part of Beachy Aerodrome was a target, as well as the nearby marshaling rail yards. And it happened that some folk with 190s tried to penetrate the bomber's stream, and my element was dispatched. And the pilot chose to dive toward the ground from the formation altitude, let's say, to try to gain speed to get away. Fortunately, I was able to stay with him, and I always say, well, he made a fatal turn, because thinking back on it, if he'd have yanked to the right, I wouldn't have had a chance probably to get around and get my gun lead on him. He made a right turn, and I just happened to be in the right position to damage the aircraft, and we crashed on the airfield.
The day I was captured by the Germans is rather unique because that was the 19th of December, 1944. There were 4 divisions that constituted the Bulge, and they were replaced by 4 like us who had no experience at all on the line. But they figured that we could hold it because there was no activity at all at that time. And basically there wasn't any for about a month. And then all hell broke loose.
D. Paris of Silver Spring tried to join the military on December 8, 1941, one day after learning of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He was determined to help his country. Mr. Paris' unit, the 14th Tank Battalion of the 9th Armored Division, ended up in the heavily forested Ardennes region of eastern Belgium and northern Luxembourg in December of 1944. The 9th was soon involved in the Battle of the Bulge, which eventually included 600,000 Americans, 55,000 British troops, and 500,000 German troops. There were more than 81,000 American casualties over the next 5 months, including 19,000 deaths. Mr. Paris has worked very hard over the past 7 decades to make sure that this battle is never forgotten. At age 97, he is here with us today. Please welcome him.
First things first, to that 105-year-old lady over there, do you mind dating a younger man who's only 97? Now that we got the important things underway, I was a tank platoon leader with 5 tanks and 24 brave men who came out of the cavalry, and they had that cavalry spirit of drive, draw the sabers and charge. We were attached to 2nd Infantry Division, supposed to capture the bridge, the dams of the Roar River dams. And when the German army struck that morning, 3 German armies, they immediately canceled the mission we had and attached us to the 106th Division. And you heard from a man from there. 2 regiments were surrounded, 107,000 men surrendered, taken prisoner, and we were with the 3rd Battalion. So we continued to fight. After 36 hours, the combat command of 7th Armored Division joined us, and we stayed to slow down the main German attack by the 5th Panzer Army. Excuse me. On the morning of the 23rd of December, word reached us that we were going to try to get out. We were at St. Vith. Can you hear me? Would you like some water? No. That won't help. I got phlegm in my throat. Anyway, word came that we were going to try to get out. We were encircled at St. Vith. The 82nd opened a road that we did get out, managed to get out. We'd been 7 days and 7 nights of constant combat against the enemy, and we got out with a few casualties because the enemy behind us had their anti-tank guns set up. All that time we were on the secret list, so our actions were not being reported. Now the highest award that a unit can receive is a Presidential Unit Citation. That's the highest award of a unit in combat. We were put in for that and was denied, had no record of us. So when the Cold War ended, we got the German records from 3 armies. They were all reporting they were fighting us. So we sent the records of the German records to the Army Awards Branch, and they gave us a Presidential Unit Citation 55 years later. 55 years later. The mills of the gods do grind slowly. But as I say, we had the cavalry spirit, and we were often employed by my battalion commander, great commander. My troops were just good at that, so we were often leading. Later, we were leading toward the Rhine River. The Germans had destroyed all the bridges across the Rhine, and they had never been invaded by a foreign force across that Rhine River. It's long, 800 miles long, wide, swift, 9 feet deep. But when I arrived up there, I was a leading element in that task force. And on the high hills looking down, and I radioed Colonel Ingman that the bridge was standing, but I couldn't reach him through my radio. And Lieutenant Grimble was beside me with a brand new M26 tank. He tried his radio reach, he reported it. Word went back through. General Hogan, General Leonard wasn't going to change the Corps order. Our orders were not to capture a bridge because they didn't expect one. It was to clear the west bank of the Rhine River of all the enemy. But Colonel Ingman made the major decision. He sent the infantry out. And I can remember seeing them crouch down, crossing, and the engineers cutting the wires and throwing the explosives in the river. And 2 of them went off, small one in the middle of the bridge, a big one at the approach, which kept our vehicles. We couldn't cross. And the colonel sent me up on the hills where cannons were firing down on those troops trying to kill them and destroy the bridge. I silenced those guns and came back and reported to him. We crossed the river there, but our tanks were not of any help over there because it was a confined area, high hills around. When Eisenhower learned of this through the channels, he told all the troops you can, get in there. So 24 hours, in the next 24 hours, 8,000 troops got across on that bridge. And on the 10th day, 8,000 in the first 24 hours. On the 10th day, the center of the bridge fell in the river. By then, they had 2 pontoon bridges. But these were the men who enlarged the bridgehead and kept them from, they sent 100 planes over trying to destroy it and catch us on the east bank. And anyway, it was a great experience. And we also received the Presidential Unit Citation for that action, too. And many years later, when Eisenhower was in the White House, he sent for a group of us, issued us a certificate called the group at Remagen, and he remembered that and thanked us all, and we had a time together for it. It was a great unit I was in. Then we met the Russians, and so we thought, well, that was Moldy River, I believe. We had 3,000 guns facing us at Leipzig, and we liberated the first concentration camp, so we were really going fine along there. We met the Russians. We said, oh, the war is over. Instead, they sent us from the 1st Army to the 3rd Army under Patton. He didn't wait a minute. He said, go into Czechoslovakia. So here was my platoon, and we ended up at Carlsbad, Czechoslovakia, and they stopped us. Some high commander set down a word, don't fire unless fired upon. Well, that's an asinine thing for a guy in combat to do. You don't wait for it. But he's back there 100 miles back, see? What he didn't tell us was that the war was near in, and they knew it, and we didn't know. But 2 days later, when I reached Carlsbad, Czechoslovakia, the word came down, and that was the way the war ended. So it was a tremendous service, and for that, I'm truly grateful, and I want to thank all my fellow veterans around here. Good.
As you've just heard, no matter what the generation, being part of the military or in a military family leads to a lifestyle and sacrifices that those outside the military may find hard to understand. Our next speaker knows about those sacrifices as she grew up in a military family, made all the moves from place to place that come with that. Please welcome Montgomery County Council Member Valerie Irvin.
Good morning. My name is Valerie Irvin, and I am the daughter of a career Air Force enlisted soldier and a Montgomery County Council member. My father left Alabama in 1945 to join the Army. He lied about his age. He first enlisted in the Army, and when President Truman signed the executive order integrating the military, he enlisted in the Air Force. I was born on Anderson Air Force Base on the island of Guam to two very young parents. My four siblings and I grew up on military bases, and we moved around a lot. I remember my mother starching and ironing my father's fatigues, and when my father was home on Sunday nights, he would bring his shoe kit into the living room and polish his boots and his dress shoes until they shined like glass. I was always proud of my father growing up, but I never understood that what he was doing each and every single day for almost 30 years was serving our country, and that he was willing to give his life in that service. This became true for me when my father was deployed to Vietnam to serve there for 1 year when I was in junior high school. I remember how unpopular the Vietnam War was at the time. We didn't have the internet then, so we wrote lots of letters back and forth. When my father returned home, he didn't talk much about his experience for many years until he got sick from exposure to Agent Orange. He visited here in Montgomery County before he died, and he asked me to take him to the Vietnam War Memorial. I had never seen my father shed a tear until then. He spent hours searching for the soldiers that he served with, and he stood at that wall for a long, long time. Afterwards, he talked about the friends that he had lost and how the sacrifices of those men and women should never be forgotten. I'm wearing a button today, a photograph of my father in his fatigues taken around 1973, and also a button of my nephew, who is a staff sergeant in the Air Force who just returned home from Korea. I also want to mention the sacrifices made by military families each and every day, the courage and optimism that is necessary to bear the long separations from loved ones is often more difficult than many people will ever know. My father's military service inspired me to a life of public service, and there is not a day that goes by that I don't talk to him and ask him for his advice. Today, we are here to say thank you. President Obama said it best in his speech last week at the Democratic National Convention, and I quote, "Yes, our path is harder, but it leads to a better place. Yes, our road is longer, but we travel it together. We don't turn back. We leave no one behind." So many of your lives are based on these principles, and your service to our nation is what makes America the greatest place on earth. Thank you for your commitment and sacrifice on behalf of a grateful nation.
As we're constantly being reminded today, it is very difficult and emotionally trying to try and sum up one of the most complex periods in the history of the world in just one morning. What we're learning, though, is that no book, no movie, no history can recount these stories like the people who were actually there. Here now are a few more of their memories.
Word has gotten through to high command. There'll be thousands of troops coming here. He said, you go out and stop them because those trucks will jam the whole town and nobody can get near the bridge. I said, yes, sir. He said, dismount them. So I took my platoon out to the edge of town, and sure enough, here came the first convoy. I would stop the convoy. Who's the convoy leader? Or in a convoy are different serials, different groups. Sometimes it was a captain, sometimes it was a general, and I stopped say, you can't go further. They didn't know why they were there. They'd been pulled out and sent up there as rapidly as could be. And I'd say, here's a sketch and here's what it is. We got a bridge across the Rhine River. Here's how you get down to it. You must dismount. Then I would send the trucks down the route which we were supposed to take in our attack, which I just tell the lead driver, go down here about a half a mile or so and pull off in the field and near a house and take over the house. Move in with your troops. And then I'd send the others down through the town, because they would have blocked the whole entry. And I later learned that 8,000 troops got across the bridge in 24 hours. 8,000 that they got up there and got across on the original bridge. In the meantime, the engineers were building 2 ponton bridges, one on each side. So many of the troops would say they crossed the Rhine, crossed on the ponton bridge. Because on the 10th day, the bridge fell in. So that was my job that night, and that was the end of Germany. And exactly 2 months later, on May the 7th, exactly 2 months later, came a surrender. So it was major.
As we walked out of General Yodel's residence where he was, I was there. General Yodel was on the right, and his aide was on the left, and that's when he asked me if he could go to the men's room. And I, being an American officer, knowing what it is when you have to go take a leak, I said, sure. So I left him, and he was walking to the latrine, and suddenly it hit me. What have I done? Admiral von Dornenburg committed suicide one day. If he commits suicide in the men's room, I'm finished as an officer of the United States Army. So my blood turned absolutely ice. I rushed into the latrine, and there was only one stall that was being occupied. I rushed in and I banged it open with my door, and there was General Yoder sitting on the commode, and he looked at me and he said, "Is something wrong?" I said, "No, nothing is wrong." So
two of the men and I left Oak Ridge for Thunder Ride to Birmingham. We were going to watch a University of Alabama, University of Tennessee game. And we got there about an hour early and went into a bar, naturally. You get thirsty after a ride like that. So there was a round table in the back of the room with about half dozen GIs at it. And we just casually waved to them, and one of them said, "Joe." And I looked at him, and sure enough, it was a man that I had had basic training with. So I went over, shook hands, and he invited us to sit at the table with him. And I asked him where he'd been, and it was obvious where he'd been. He had ribbons down to his navel. And he says, "Where have you been?" Because we were pretty well denuded of medals, except for Good Conduct Medal in the American Theater. And I said, "Oh, we're from Oak Ridge." And he stopped. He says, "You know, we were on our way to invade Japan. Your production of the bomb and its subsequent use may have saved our lives." He says, "You cannot buy us a drink."
In Linz, there was a large modern apartment development called Bindemickel, and they put the displaced persons in there. And my job was to go to Bindemickel every Friday afternoon with a clipboard and take a census of the residents so that we could provide food and other supplies the following week. Well, one day I knocked on the door, and a rather shriveled guy came to the door, and behind him was standing a woman and two children. Now, it was very unusual to see children because in the death camps, in the labor camps, children rarely survived. And then I happened to look over the shoulder of this man, and there was a photograph, tattered photograph, tacked to the wall. And he looked very familiar to me. It looked like my Uncle Irving, who was running his drugstore in Springfield Gardens, Long Island at the time, and very much alive. And so I asked him in my broken Yiddish, I said, "Wie ist das? You know, who is this?" And he said, "That's my father. He was killed in Warsaw by the Nazis." And so after some conversation in my broken Yiddish, I found out that this guy was related to my Uncle Irving, and that this guy whose picture was on the wall was my Uncle Irving's uncle, in other words, the brother of his father. Now, we had assumed that all of our relatives, being Jewish, had been annihilated during the Holocaust. And so I had stumbled upon the only remnants of my family that had survived the Holocaust in Europe.
We all know that the war came to a sudden end in August of 1945. A couple of years before that, an honor student who went to pharmacy school was told that he was being sent on a special military assignment. You've already heard a little from him. He and the others on that assignment were never directly told what the experiments they were conducting would lead to. It turned out that they had been assigned to the Manhattan Project, developing the weapon that, by most accounts, may have saved as many as 1 million American lives. Please join me in welcoming that current resident of Silver Spring, Boris Osherhoff.
It all wasn't blood and sweat and tears. At one count at Oak Ridge, we had 14 women to a man. Believe me, it was not that tough. No, I was down at, I had been assigned by the Army to Virginia Polytech Institute for graduate training in chemical engineering. You see, I'm a pharmacist, and they sent pharmacists to chemical engineering school, and they sent the chemical engineers to pharmacy school, but we all know that. Well, anyway, we were down there, and one day I was told to report to the colonel's office. I reported to the colonel's office, and there's a man sitting there, plain clothes. He says, "Sit down." He sat down. And he started to ask me some questions about my parents, about me, about my scholastic background. I had been pretty good in chemistry. And he says, "How come you did so lousy in math?" I said, "Well, it's not one of my favorite subjects." He says, "Yeah, but you have found innovative ways of solving problems without using complex math." I said, "Yeah, self-defense." And he says, "You know, I can use you." The gentleman was General Grove. That's how I got into the Manhattan Project. I spent a year up at Columbia University working on a barrier to separate the isotopes, and then went to Oak Ridge and did product control, and really enjoyed the work itself. And then came Alamogordo, the first bomb that was detonated in this country. I don't know whether you're all aware that there was a third one that we used on ourselves. And that night, the GIs all sat down on a footlocker in one of the men's huts, and we said, "What have we done? Do you realize what's going to go on?" I said, "This is ruinous." We never solved the problem until that clipping that you saw, where I met a man coming back from the Battle of the Bulge that was going to be retrained and then sent to help invade Japan. And as he said, we very well may have saved his life. It's an awful way to do it, but it's got to be done. And that is the moral dilemma that's going to face, I think I spoke with someone here about that moral dilemma, the councilman. It's going to face our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. What are we going to do about this horrible weapon? I don't want to talk about politics, but there are various positions that we can, with a good judgment, persuasion, the right people, little by little get rid of them. But are we going to be able to get rid of the bootleg use of this? It's all up in the air. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know whether in the long run we have done mankind a service or a disservice in developing the atomic bomb. But I do know this, that we have, with that bomb, saved many of my compatriots here who the only thing they were guilty of is uncommon valor. That is the valor that's demonstrated when a guy is willing to lay down his life and limb to protect his country. And they are certainly guilty of that. And I'm proud to have been associated with the bomb, to have done that job. Thank you.
We're just about there. There is not much else that really needs to be said. We tend to celebrate youth in this country when the people who have accomplished the most tend to go unrecognized. Not today, though. Not here. Not now. We know that for some of you, just getting here today wasn't all that easy, but as you did 70 years ago, you found a way. Thank you for coming. Hang around for a few more minutes. I have a feeling that there are others who may want to take this opportunity to tell you once and for all what you mean to us and what you mean to your country.
Wonderful job, Bill.